John and I talk qualified immunity on this week's podcast.
Bald,
blind,
and buddies.
What do you say, Timmy C? Happy Sunday to you, pal.
Happy Sunday. It feels like autumn here in the Midwest. It's nice.
It's starting, right? I remember a couple weeks ago, Katie goes, I just read Apple sent a notification that this is the last sunset in the 8 o'clock hour. Because the days are getting shorter and so forth. And you do kind of see it trickle down. But I don't mind fall. Baseball,
like
playoffs,
fall.
Football.
Yeah.
I like the weather. I could do without winter usually, pretty much from Christmas until the Masters, say, or open or spring training. I'm kind of in a doldrums. But maybe the Irish make a run in the playoffs again and keep me entertained for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have some big news. Your son's off to college, and you met with somebody to try and help the Bald, Blind, and Buddies podcast, right?
Yeah, so thanks to all our listeners. I will say that to start out. But yeah, so we were cold approached. That was, hey, talk to us about get more listeners or something. And so I set up a meeting with this nice gentleman, and he's like, well, how do you feel about your numbers? What motivates you to grow the podcast? And I'm like,
did he know you were a psychiatrist? I mean, that's kind of,
yeah.
Did he know that? Or
I told him somewhere along the way. And his program certainly costs money and time, and I'm thinking to myself, can I just pay you to help, me grow? And he's like, I don't think it's going to work for us. And I'm like, all right, you're ditching me. Like I'm trying to theoretically spend money with you. And you won't. I'm like, is this reverse psychology?
There might be an element of that, which is he goes, we're not going to work with you, and then that makes you want to work with him even more. There's probably an element of that, but that's not for me. It doesn't do that. No.
Yeah, I was curious. I was like, what am I supposed to say? I'm like, what do people usually say? And it was. I think he also didn't want to really give his pitch. Like he didn't want to give away. I don't know what it was, but anyways,
give away the secret sauce. As it
were. So anyways, we're growing endogenously, folks out there. Feel free to share. Tell people about us, spread the word. We got good stuff coming up. We got interviews, and so it was interesting.
Yeah, and people ask me, how are you getting some of these famous people? Because we've got Bob Ricks, former special agent in charge of Oklahoma City. He's coming on. We also have one of Timothy McVeigh's defense attorneys. He's coming on.
Randy
and people
Quinn.
Are asking, how are you doing this? And I say, look, it's not my good looks. It's Timmy's personal story. I don't mean to embarrass you, but
it's your persistence. It's the fact that you keep writing them.
Two things can be true at the same time. I don't take no for an answer, and that's why I'm in sales. It's in my DNA. I understand that. But to that end, do you think that they'd be interested in a 49-year-old graduate from Notre Dame if I didn't know you personally? I mean, your story is what resonates. I mean, for the love of God, you were asked to be one of the consulting producers for the Good Doctor.
Well, no, they just wanted to interview me. But yeah. So anyways, regardless, yeah, we got some good stuff coming up. We somebody from Notre Dame in the leadership in the future.
Yeah, we do. Yep. Yeah. We had Wes Pritchett. A lot of people have reached out to us about that because they're Notre Dame fans, even people you would not expect because they love the Irish. And I get it. Notre Dame is like Duke basketball, the Yankees, the Dallas Cowboys. There's no gray area, right? It's black or white. You either love them as I do or you despise them. But I also can understand why people despise them because I despise the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
But I did make Jerry Jones my hero of the week after that scene that he did in Landman, which was quite touching.
Yeah.
But, these consultants, they use consultant speak, and there's actually an app where you can plug in just any random sentence and it spits out consultant jargon. I'll send it to you. I'll see if I can link it in the show notes because it is absolutely hysterical.
Yeah.
Like if you say to Timmy, hey, Timmy, how was your day? It's, we're going to level set here and restructure our blah, blah, blah. And he goes through this whole thing and it's like, I'm just saying hello,
Yeah.
So, but anyhow, that reminds me, I have to give the trivia question answer and I have a new one for this week. Is that cool, Timmy?
Let's do it.
So I said, look, there's 26 letters in the alphabet and there are 50 states. There is only one letter that is not used in the name of a state, and one of our listeners did get it. But
not just one of our listeners, a former guest and friend of the show.
Oh, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Ben.
We should. Yeah, we should have an FOS, friend of the show.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. It is the letter Q that does not appear in any state name. Every other letter, including X, New Mexico, Arizona, Z, New York has Y. So all the random letters that you would assume, it just doesn't appear.
Until we annex Quebec. Bonjour.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is true. Well, if Trump has his way, that could be in the
It could
offing,
happen.
right?
So we may have to. We
And
may
by
have
the
to
way,
update.
I do have to give Trump credit. He is driving tourism to an area it's never been. I forget which airline it is, but they just started offering for the first time flights to Greenland. And one of the pilots who flew, he landed in the airport, and I'm not going to try to say the name, but it's a 4-letter name. It's Nuul, I believe. And he said, "Welcome to so-and-so." That is the first time as a pilot I've ever said that, because Greenland has become sort of a destination as a consequence of Trump's behavior. I'm not sure if the residents of Greenland see that as a positive or a negative, but it is an interesting twist on the Trump presidency, is it not?
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah. So, and this week's trivia question, pretty simple, actually, Timmy. Pretty simple. The 4 major sports in the United States: baseball, football, hockey, and basketball.
Major League Soccer. Oh, sorry.
We are actually going to see a Union game. That's the Philadelphia Union. They were runner-up not last year, 2 years ago. There was a stretch there where Philadelphia lost the World Series, lost the Super Bowl, and lost the MLS Cup in succession. It was something in like 93 days. They lost all 3 championships. It's never happened before. But no, the 4 major ones: hockey, baseball, basketball, football. What is the largest state without one in terms of population?
Ooh. Without one of any of those?
Without any of the 4.
Ooh. Okay.
You have a guess?
Well, I would guess Iowa, but
You would be incorrect.
yeah.
And we'll leave it at that. So, but Timmy, we're going to talk today about something that is taking on more and more, I wouldn't say importance, but I think it's getting more press. And I'm not sure if that's reflection of sort of everyone now has a camera on their phone, the availability of information. You know, police, for lack of a better term, get, I think, in many ways, a bad rap. I can, 2 things, I can hold competing thoughts in my brain. And I want to stress this. My wife's grandfather was the chief of police of Scranton. I love the police. I'm liberal / libertarian. I love the police. Recognizing that there are certain elements within the police that are problematic, racist, or otherwise, I still can hold that thought and say, yes, we still need the police. I think the same percentage of people, and it may be a little bit higher, I don't know, I've never seen studies on this, but in any walk of life, any profession, there's going to be elements that are sort of bad seeds, as it were. I'm sure you have some people that are not ethical that are doctors, right, Timmy?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Why am I bringing this up? Because I think with the availability of cameras and things being noticed about the police these days, one of the things that's it's given rise to is more focus on this notion of qualified immunity. Are you familiar with qualified immunity, Tim?
Well, at first I thought it was what happened after you got an mRNA vaccine for COVID. You developed qualified immunity, but that is not the case.
Do you want to tell everybody what your understanding from a layperson's perspective is of qualified immunity?
Sure. So it's in the performance of your official duties as sort of a government agent. You make a decision. You are protected you personally from the consequences of that decision. Basically, if it was, I'll say, made in good faith, but I think that's more complicated than that.
Yeah, and there is a substantial body of argument that puts forth the idea that, look, you should have qualified immunity if you are an elected official or a state official or things of that nature. And basically, one of the things is, and this is sort of the delineation that's put forth by advocates of it. Number one, it encourages what they call effective official conduct. It allows government officials to make decisions, perform their duties without the constant fear of being dragged into court, right? And further, it protects against those sort of baseless, frivolous lawsuits, things of that nature. And the idea basically is that, you know, in the official role as, for instance, a police officer, there are Supreme Court cases that have dealt with this. They had a warrant to go in, they knocked on the wrong door, and it turned out that the person next door was engaged in illegal criminal behavior. That was a good faith error, right? That's clearly something that I don't think the police officer got up that day and said, I'm going to go knock on the wrong door and catch somebody in a crime. But where it becomes problematic is with police officers that have got away with sort of gross misconduct. And that's kind of the problem. And I'll pause there for just a second. You wanted to offer some context as well, did you not, Tim?
Well, I think the analogies I think of, you know, in the business space, people often have a limited liability corporation or an S corp, so that if they run a business and the business goes under, they still have their personal assets, right? And there's also laws to protect Good Samaritans who try to do CPR, say, and then break somebody's ribs, and then they get sued for trying to save a life. Like we have these protections in other areas as well. So I lump those together in my brain.
Yeah, I think the Good Samaritan example is very germane in that, if somebody is trying to do the best and they happen to injure somebody, to your point, break their rib while they're performing CPR, let's not punish the person who is trying to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
But George Will has written about this extensively in the Washington Post. I'm just going to read one of his quotes, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Qualified immunity was originally intended to protect endangered police making split-second decisions in, for example, high-speed chases or shootouts with armed suspects. But courts have gone too far and granted qualified immunity to officers who, for instance, stole more than $225,000 in cash and rare coins while executing a search warrant, to a deputy sheriff who, while trying to shoot an unthreatening pet dog, wounded a 10-year-old child, to state investigators without a warrant who entered a doctor's office and searched for medical records of patients, even to some university bureaucrats who, because their flagrant denial of some students' First Amendment rights, did not violate clearly established law." So basically, the premise behind qualified immunity is unless there's case law nearly identical to the case before the court, you cannot win on qualified immunity. So it has to be, it reminds me almost of that Bugs Bunny cartoon. And for those who are of a certain age, you may remember it, where I think it was Bugs Bunny is sold to Elmer Fudd an insurance policy. But then you read the insurance policy and it's only good for 5 minutes on this day when a hurricane hits and blah, blah, blah. And all those things come to pass. I mean, the asinine nature of it is hysterical. But the basic premise is qualified immunity has gone, in many people's eyes, including myself, too far in protecting bad behavior because some cases are so obvious, and you see it on camera now with police officers. There was a famous case about 10 years ago with a police officer who shot a fleeing suspect in the back without a gun or anything like that. He ended up going to jail. But unless there's case law nearly identical to what has happened, you're going to lose on the qualified immunity case. And that's where I think it's problematic. What do you think? Is this going too far, Tim, or is the pendulum swinging in the correct direction? How do you see it as a layperson?
Well, I think the pendulum may be swinging in the right direction. I guess the thing that struck me out of what you said is courts have established qualified immunity, right?
Well, it's basically it's been around since the late 19th century, and then it was really expanded in the 1980s, basically saying qualified immunity was there, that constitutionally, unless their violations are quote unquote so obvious and clear that they're going to be protected. The basic premise behind it is cops have to make split-second decisions. A gun goes off, someone gets injured. Can they be sued? But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I think anytime we let the court define a standard or things like that, we run into challenges, right? This is why we have a legislature and elected officials. That this has been the domain of how various district and federal and Supreme Courts decide over time. But if we want to address this, one way to do this is with a legislature that actually does things, right? And we could spell this out as a nation.
How would you spell it out? And again, this is the issue that it becomes. The devil is oftentimes in the details. And I respect what you're saying, which this seems to be the responsibility of the province of the legislature. You remember that, Article 1 branch of government that has lost its spine and its ability to do anything. It doesn't even pass a budget anymore. But how would you spell it out? Meaning, there are some cases that are so obvious. And I liken this to something that is probably near and dear to you, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. What qualifies as disabled? Is it someone who lost a limb? It depends. Can they still do their job? Is it someone, obviously you have a well-documented disability in your blindness. To that end, however, what about liver disease or things of that nature?
Right.
The devil's oftentimes in the details, and the same thing would happen with qualified immunity. I'm just curious what the legislature would say.
Well, I think they would remove the you have to have a very specific precedent. I think that's a very high bar. And what the legislature, I think, would tend to say, and the Constitution would say, is send this to a jury of the peers, right? Like a jury can figure this out. So I think the barriers that come between.
But again, I'm concerned that opens a Pandora's box, that a police officer knocks on somebody's door and they're accused of racism. You know, these kinds of things. This is where I worry that maybe qualified immunity is needed. Maybe we just need to trim a little bit of the fat around the edges.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. It's needed because, you know, there's so much Monday morning quarterbacking you can do. And these people are making very dangerous decisions quickly. And so they need to have a lot of leeway. But for example, I think the clearly established precedent, the examples you gave certainly sound egregious. And so dialing that back, do you want to talk about, was it Barnes v. Felix?
Yeah, I'll tell in just a second. But let me finish with the last quote that Will has from his article. This is earlier this year where they were talking about a case. He basically says the Supreme Court of the United States dropped the ball because they didn't offer clarity to a case that to most people's, reasonable people's minds, was so egregious. And in this case, essentially, in Baltimore, a police officer shot through the wall at the suspect, hit the suspect, but it bounced off of the refrigerator and struck a 5-year-old kid in the face. Oh my goodness. And basically, based on qualified immunity, the appellate court said no one is free. There's no case law dealing with a bystander. You know, they have no reasonable expectation that they won't be shot. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's so, like, to say that out loud is almost hysterical on its face, but it's what essentially happens. And at the end of this article, he says qualified immunity properly shields from personal liability the overwhelming majority of competent police officers who might make honest misjudgments in very high pressure situations. But as a federal appellate court judge has said, qualified immunity has begun to look like unqualified impunity for misbehaving public officials. And again, that's where the line has gone too far. And one of the things that I always like this quote by Michelle Obama. Say what you want about her, love her, hate her, nothing, but she has a good quote. And she said, the reality of power is that it doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you were. And so I tend to be a very big advocate of, for instance, body cams now. Police officers have body cams. They have to record things. It's not just a he said, she said, because, and I've said this, there's a local radio host who is out of Philadelphia but is broadcast nationally named Michael Smerconish. And he was a defense attorney. I believe he was a prosecutor at one point. And he said, if you had talked to me 25 years ago about the police, whatever they said I would have agreed with or I would have believed. He said, but the reality is having seen videos and things of this nature, I'm not so sure anymore. It's not to say that we don't need the police, that the vast majority of police are doing a very, very difficult job in high pressure situations, but qualified immunity, is it becoming unqualified impunity? And that's where the line has to be drawn.
Yeah, I hear here. I agree with that. I think I'm all for restraining the power of government, right? And
yeah.
So at the same time, I mean, we have, like I say, I still think, I know how hard, well, I have an idea of how hard that job must be. And so I just want to make sure we keep a rein on the Monday morning quarterbacks.
Yeah. Again, this is trimming around the edges. This is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because there are bad cops does not mean you get rid of the police department. Because there are egregious situations of police, abusing or public officials abusing their status or positions, that doesn't necessarily mean that the law of qualified immunity is not just.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think Indiana, I believe, has a malpractice system whereby a malpractice case goes before, I want to say it's like a 3-person panel, maybe 2 judges or 2 medical people and a layperson. And they decide if the case has enough merit to go forward. So I wonder if there's a way to build in.
It's almost like a grand jury.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's a way to build in something like that.
Yeah, again, there's everyday examples. You can apply to Harvard, but you're going to pay. And part of the reason they do that, and this is basically like your copay, it's because they don't want people to use the emergency room as their, doctor of first or last. They want it as last resort, not first resort, right? Yeah. So they make you pay because you have to put up some skin in the game, as it were. Mm-hmm. You're not going to just apply to Harvard. They don't want everybody wasting their time. So it costs money to apply to Harvard. I'm wondering where we do that here, meaning where is the line? Where is the skin in the game that this is? I mean, those examples I gave are clearly egregious, awful. To say that a bystander doesn't have a reasonable expectation they won't be shot is just insane.
That is insane.
But again, I worry that if they lower the bar for qualified immunity, every questionable call by a police officer, they're going to get dragged into court. So again, I want to stress that this is not a black and white issue.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Well, to that end, Timmy, you had asked about Barnes versus Felix. And so they basically what the Supreme Court does is more often than not, they weigh what they consider to be differences between the circuit courts of appeals. So there's 12 circuit courts of appeals. The standard of what they call the totality of the circumstances has been adopted by the vast majority of the circuit courts. The one in Texas, I believe it was the Fifth Circuit. I could be wrong. It could be the Fourth. I believe it was the Fifth. But anyhow, they have not adopted that principle. And in that case, Barnes versus Felix, the police officer shot this motorist who he thought was trying to pull away. Looking at the totality of the circumstances.
Hold on, though. Hold on. He stepped on like the running board or the side of the vehicle while the person is driving away. The officer did.
And shot him and killed him.
And shot him, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now, they ruled that the police officer was in his rights because under that Circuit Court of Appeals sort of jurisprudence, they have not adopted the totality of circumstances. They had adopted what they called immediate threat, I believe it is, which is if you are in any way, shape, or form, even in an instant, feel a threat towards your life, you as a police officer have the right to return fire. Most reasonable people looking at the totality of the circumstances, and you want to read about it, link it in our show notes, will you, Timmy?
Yeah.
Would any reasonable person, and again, it's kind of like how do you define pornography? You kind of know it when you see it, right?
Yeah.
The same thing applies here, which is most reasonable people looking at this say that the police officer vastly overreacted and that person should be alive today. He's not. But based on their case law, they had ruled, yes, he was within his rights to fire that gun. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0. No, that standard is too restrictive. You should have used the totality of the circumstances to determine whether or not that police officer was acting appropriately. Again, to your point, Timmy, this is where a jury of your peers is important. It should be put before them, I believe. So,
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
and again, just to give you some context, some background, prior case law dealing with this, in 1985, the Supreme Court said in a case called Tennessee versus Gardner that the use of deadly force to prevent the escape of all felony suspects, whatever the circumstances, is constitutionally unreasonable. So the point being is look, and this is why the courts have basically said, don't get into high-speed chases. Just let them go and we'll catch them later, right? And, in another case, Chief Justice Rehnquist said, look, the totality of circumstances should be evaluated from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene rather than with the gift of 20/20 hindsight. I totally agree with that. But based even on just a cursory reading of these circumstances in this case, Felix, the officer, overreacted, and Barnes is now dead, unfortunately. And it was a 9-0 decision, so that clearly tells you something when you can get liberals and conservatives to agree and it comes down 9-0. It's a big deal. But again, to that point, it's a first step, and I will argue it is a very first step. And, every great journey begins with the first step. Maybe this is the right direction we're headed to finally deal with appropriately. And I'm not saying qualified immunity is wrong, but I'm just saying it might need a little bit of updating and finishing around the edges.
Right. And I am encouraged, that all the judges agreed on this. We hear so much about the divided court and people deciding based on ideology. So it's reassuring that they're all on the same page here.
And actually, just to sort of, because my whack job this week is actually going to be two members of said Supreme Court. Nice lead in, Timmy.
Yeah.
But just to let people know, the press around the Supreme Court is really focused on the handful of cases. The Supreme Court hears typically anywhere from 40 to 75 cases a year. A lot of those cases, I would say a clear majority, are either unanimous or there's one dissent. It's really the hot button issues, transgender rights, these types of things that get sort of, the 5-4 decisions, and then it comes down to ideology and all those sorts of things. But again, this is, again, to my earlier point, just because there's certain police officers who may have, bad tendencies doesn't mean the police should be disbanded. Just because the court may not rule the way that you necessarily like does not mean that the court needs to be thrown out and started over. So, well, Timmy, to that end, let me tell you about my whack job this week. This is a perfect segue. Okay.
Yeah.
So I am of the belief that the further you get away, the easier it is to forget things. And as I age, I will never, ever, until my last dying breath, ever say anything but the following. What happened on January 6, 2021 was essentially a coup d'etat by a defeated presidential candidate. A number of people died, including police officers. I put the blame squarely on President Trump's shoulders. That being said, however, The American public looked and said, we're going to give him another shot. However, I am reminded of Liz Cheney's famous saying during the January 6th hearings, which was, Trump is temporary. He will be gone someday, but the stain of your dishonor will remain forever. And that's why I'm going to bring up my two whack jobs. I think the further we've gotten away, we've forgotten how egregious and disgusting the behavior of Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas has been. Both are personal friends, quote unquote, with billionaires. Why do I bring that up, Timmy?
Guilt by association?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. This is a sheer mathematical question. And here's my question, okay? Do you have any idea how many billionaires there are in the United States?
40.
565. There's quite a bit more than that.
Okay.
565. Do you have any idea how many citizens there are in the United States?
You mean documented?
Touche. Fair enough.
How many?
Somewhere between 325, 350 million, right?
Okay.
What is the mathematical probability that one of those 565 is going to be friends with? Oh, it just happens to be two of the 9 people on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. Why do I bring that up? Because I had the distinct honor of actually waiting on being a server for a billionaire, a fellow by the name of Al West. He founded SEI Investments here in Pennsylvania. Nicest fellow. This is 25 years ago. Nicest fellow. He gave me a very generous tip, told me the service was excellent, and I think he said he would ask for me when he was back, but I had since left the job, blah, blah, blah. Why am I bringing it up? Because Al West did not fly me on a private jet to Alaska on a seat that otherwise would have gone unused. He certainly didn't buy me an RV and then forgive the loan, nor did he take me on a $500,000 cruise in the Far East, as was the case with Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas. The further we get away from this, the easier it is for people to swallow. I'm not there. I'm making Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito my whack jobs of the week. I think it needs to be deserved, or I think it's deserved. I think it needs to be revisited. The fact that Paul Singer, who had cases before the court, flew Samuel Alito to Alaska on his private jet, and no one raises an eyebrow. The fact that Harlan Crow has given in excess of $3 million in gifts, or it might be Harlan Crow and others, I apologize, but the substantial majority of it has come from Harlan Crow. For Clarence Thomas, I just am saying on the basis of math, it's very unlikely that Harlan Crow and Paul Singer would have suddenly been friends with Samuel Alito if he was a janitor and Clarence Thomas if he was a bus driver. That's all I'm saying. They're my whack jobs of the week. I'm not going to let it die, Tim.
Okay. Gotcha. Money is bad.
No, but here's a perfect example. And again, there used to be a party called the Republicans under Reagan that even the appearance of impropriety was frowned upon and screamed at and blah, blah, blah. Do you remember when Loretta Lynch, who was the attorney general, had a private conversation on the runway of an airport with former President Bill Clinton, the implication being that he was trying to persuade her to not prosecute Hillary Clinton or something like that? That's a bad look. This example with Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas is a direct quid pro quo. They both Paul Singer and Harlan Crow have had cases before the Supreme Court. I am shocked that they, are such personal friends with these billionaires.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Just based on math, I find it remarkable. The odds of 350 million people, 565 billionaires, and they have chosen these two men as their friends.
Well, I mean,
just
honestly,
remarkable.
though, you have to filter through, attending elite universities, and like it trickles down pretty quickly. And do we know that billionaires don't interact with the others? I mean, didn't one of them?
How many billionaires do you know, Tim?
Well, Beyonce, didn't Beyonce give somebody tickets and things like that?
How many billionaires do you know, Tim?
0.
I get it. Power breeds corruption. I understand that. I just find these to be so egregious, and people are, it's just so above the fold that I just find this to be unacceptable.
Right.
What happened on January 6th was a coup. These two men should be the death of shame. They should not be on the Supreme Court. And let's not even forget that Samuel Alito flew an American flag upside down, Tim.
See our previous episode, Star Spangled Banner on that one.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, speaking of what's above the fold, my hero is a gentleman by the name of Warren Smith. I've been watching his YouTube channel for years. It's called the Secret Scholar Society. And what he often does is plays clips of discussions and then highlights the argumentation strategy or the logic used. He kind of became famous because he used the Socratic method, he was a teacher with one of his students, talking about J.K. Rowling and whether or not she's transphobic. By the end of the thing, the student said, "I can't assert she is, from what I know." And then May 13th of this year, he wound up getting fired by his school. Apparently, he had been doing this stuff with their approval, or at least their consent, but then they just decided to fire him. So I like it because he airs things, he points things out, he helps you think, and he helps you think about how we dialogue and use logic. An interesting guy. I'd love to have him on the show at some point. And he's my hero of the week. I wish him the best.
That's a good one. Yeah. That's a good one. Now, where was he teaching and why was he fired? I mean, we have a supposition as to why he was fired, but...
Well, I think he sort of, says it too. I don't know exactly where he was teaching. I think he's, it's interesting. People try to balance their private and their public life. And I don't think he's wanted to come out with all the details. And, I think he expresses gratitude to the school in general. And so I don't know all those details. I know him from what he does and that, I appreciate that. So, yeah, we'll link him in the show notes.
Tim. I like that.
Yeah.
I wonder what he would make of our argument about qualified immunity. Let's ask him. Let's have him on and ask. What do you say?
We should try to get him on. I think that would be great. So.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Timmy, I'm looking forward to the interviews with, as I say, former Special Agent in Charge Bob Ricks, as well as Randy Coyne, who was one of Timothy McVeigh's attorneys. This is 30 years already since Oklahoma City, so very much looking forward to that. Want to send a personal note of thanks to Wes Pritchett. I thought he was a fabulous interview.
Nicest guy.
Nicest guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not the most objective observer. It's like talking about my kids, but it's nice when your heroes don't let you down. So he was quite an interview. So
yeah.
Well, listen, enjoy it. Enjoy the house with one less kid in there. And I'll talk to you this week. Love you, pal. And this is John Bullen signing off saying, hey, misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
And this is Tim saying, if everybody likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Take care out there.